and welcome to Little Learners. In today's video I'm going to be talking about a report that came out from Ofsted about how the pandemic has affected children in early years, their education and also the settings that they attend. You may have seen in the news recently that there have been quite a lot of headlines about children forgetting how to use a knife and fork, regressing into using nappies during lockdown, and that the pandemic has really affected their education negatively. A lot of settings, teachers, practitioners have been quite upset about the way that the media has portrayed this because some of the articles seem to suggest that settings haven't put in enough support. So we will get into that. But before we do, don't forget to click that thumbs up button if you find this video interesting, as it really helps out the channel. And if you haven't already, do click that subscribe button. And of course, follow me on these social media platforms. So this came from the October 2020 briefing series about COVID-19 from Ofsted. It's important to note that a lot of the settings that took part in this were private, independent or voluntary nurseries or settings. However, I do think that a lot of the information here will be the same across the board. The main finding from this report was that practitioners were especially concerned with children's personal, social and emotional development. This was the one that was hit the hardest. Children who had returned to their settings were more anxious and less confident, which I think a lot of us would have expected. Children weren't being in that environment anymore, they weren't playing with others, and they'd got used to a whole new routine, so putting them back into an old routine would take some time for them to get used to. They also had trouble separating from their caregivers, and some had regressed back into using nappies and using comfort items such as a dummy or a blanket. The report suggests that children who continued to attend their setting did continue to make progress, but those who hadn't attended or who hadn't attended as much as they used to were negatively affected. A lot of settings reported that children needed more one-on-one adult support, and most settings had to increase their teaching of personal hygiene. Settings had also had to start providing different activities for children and restrict the activities that children had access to. So there's quite a lot to unpack here, so let's look at it a little bit more in detail. Now, there were particular groups of children that the report showed had been more negatively impacted by the pandemic than others. These included children with special educational needs and disabilities, children in poverty, children with English as an additional language, and children whose parents didn't really engage with the setting before the pandemic. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds don't always have the same access to toys and resources as other children do, and this meant that they weren't able to progress in the same way at home. I think the differences between children's home lives will have had a massive impact, and that is what this report is showing. Of course, when children are at a setting, they are all experiencing the same environment, and of course, being at home, it's going to be very different for all of them. Now, for some children who were at home, the report shows that they absolutely thrived because parents were able to dedicate lots of time to their children, they were talking lots, they were playing with their children more, and the family time was really good for them. But of course, there are a lot of families who just didn't have the time or resources for that. So there were lots of families where the parents were continuing to work from home and trying to look after their children at the same time, which is basically doing 2 full-time jobs at once. Imagine being in your office doing your job and you have your child there with you. And there were lots of other reasons that parents weren't able to engage with their children in the way that they would have been engaged with at a setting. Parents' own mental health during this whole pandemic has been massively damaged. For a lot of people, it's been an extremely difficult time, worrying about lots of different things, and so trying to manage that and manage working from home and manage looking after your children is a huge ask for any parent. And so I think it's no surprise that some children weren't given the same opportunities or experiences as other children were. And I mentioned children with English as an additional language. Of course, for many children who do not speak English at home, their English did regress. And I think that that is really to be expected, and I don't think we can expect parents, especially those who maybe aren't that confident in their own English, to be speaking English at home. And their mother tongue, their home language is so important. And so I don't think it's any surprise to any practitioner that many children with English as an additional language will have lost some of their skill in the English language. Now, when looking at the areas of learning, personal, social and emotional development was the one that most settings were concerned about. In fact, 53% said that children's skills in this area had regressed. 31% said it stayed the same, and others either said it had improved or they weren't sure. Now, 53% is a huge number. And even though 31% stayed the same, that's a long time to not be progressing. There weren't any other areas that seemed to have regressed that much, but all of the areas showed percentages above 10% or 20% of regression. Physical development, expressive arts and design, literacy and maths all show percentages above 50% for those skills staying the same, so not progressing at all. Now let's talk about returning to comfort objects and nappies. Children who are coming in more anxious and maybe have noticed that the world is very different have been coming back to settings using dummies or a comfort blanket. Again, personally, I don't think this is that surprising, and I think there are probably a lot of reasons for this. So for a lot of parents at home, this would have been a way to help comfort their child while they're trying to do all the other things that they're trying to do. The regression into nappies for children who were already toilet trained is a concern, I think, more so than the comfort objects. With the comfort objects, as children become more confident again, hopefully they won't be needing those as much or at all. With the regressing into nappies, that one I think is more of a concern, and this one is the one that a lot of media outlets have been using as a headline, and they've been saying that because children haven't been at school or nursery or a setting, they have regressed into nappies. And the big argument about this is that that isn't something that nurseries, schools and settings are responsible for. Of course, lots of them help in that journey to toilet training, but primarily it should be something that's done at home. So the fact that children have been at home and have regressed into nappies shouldn't be put on the settings or providers. Of course, again, there are reasons why this might have happened. As I've mentioned several times now, parents are under different pressures at home, and unfortunately this was just something that they didn't have the time to focus on. And I can understand that with a lot of parents who have been extremely busy and working from home. However, still a big concern. When it comes to communication and language, the opinion was kind of split. So 1/4 of settings said that communication and language had not improved during this time, but 1/4 of settings said that communication and language had improved due to children being at home with their families, talking around the dinner table. So that is something quite positive to take from that, although of course it wasn't the same for all children. Lots of children have become more integrated into daily routines with family, so helping to make dinner, going for walks together. When it comes to things like literacy and maths, the report says that for children who did not return to their early years setting, it has had a detrimental impact on their learning for most of those children. Now, safeguarding is obviously something that practitioners and teachers always keep in mind, and it has been something that has been quite a concern during the pandemic, particularly as children have been at home and not being in their setting or having contact with the setting as much. Many settings said that they had new concerns or continued concerns about neglect, and this kind of coincided with the fact that lots of support services like children's centres were also closed, so parents didn't have somewhere to go for support. Many providers had also been worried about parents' mental health and how this might be affecting children, and a lot of settings started using their social media accounts to inform parents and carers about things like food banks and domestic violence support and a range of other different things that really we wouldn't expect an early year setting to have to do, but they really have stepped up and had to support parents when there wasn't any other way to do so. The The report also showed that more families are sending their 2-year-olds to nursery or to a setting using local authority funded places because during this time lots of families have had money troubles. When it comes to special educational needs and disabilities, the report found that these children were not getting the correct support that they needed. Lots of additional support providers had closed or weren't having face-to-face visits anymore, and a lot of parents reported that they were finding their child's behaviour a lot more difficult to manage. Of course, there was a big change in routine, and this can be difficult for any child, but for a child with special educational needs and disabilities, this can impact them even more. For communicating, lots more settings started to use video calling and social media to keep in contact with parents and families. Now, when we look at the settings themselves, 58% said that they were facing financial difficulties because of the pandemic. Staffing has been a problem due to anxiety about the pandemic and, of course, illness. And although the report says that around 2/3 of settings were not worried about having to close because of financial difficulties, that still leaves 1/3 of settings being concerned that they will have to close. So personally, I don't really like how that was written, because even though 2/3 is great, 1/3 of all settings is a huge number. So that just gives you an overview of this report from Ofsted. I hope it's been interesting and now you don't have to read it. Please let me know in the comments below how this pandemic has affected you if you are at a setting, or if you are a parent or carer, how has it affected your relationship with your child's early years setting. Do give this video a thumbs up if you found it interesting or helpful. Let me know also in the comments below how you are doing, because I really want to know that my subscribers are keeping well and healthy and safe. So I really do hope that you are all well. I look forward to speaking to you in my next video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.